Hey, welcome back to Pod Logic presented by Straight Up Podcasts. I'm your host, Johnny Peterson, and this video is in response to a tweet that I put out saying that, hey, I'm going to be making some more video content. What do you want to hear? And a response that I got was they want to know how to cut down on editing and post-production time. That would be amazing to learn about, and what to do during interviews to limit the amount of time you spend in post, and what I do to produce podcasts faster. So I've got several tips that we'll be diving into today and showing some screen shares, screen recordings about that as well. So we'll dive right in. In terms of cutting down on editing and your time spent in post-production for podcasts specifically, the easiest solution is to just hire an editor or a producer. And the pros to that would be all you need to focus on is your content. Just figure out who you're going to be recording with, what y'all are going to talk about, and when you're going to do it. And your producer and editor will take care of the rest. Obviously, producers and editors are expensive, especially if you want them done right, which is the con of hiring one of these people. So the con is the amount you spend on an editor or a producer equates to the quality that you're going to get. So there's a New York Times article talking about, and you can see it in one of my older videos, where the person writing the article said, "Oh, you can just hire a virtual assistant for $5 an hour to edit your podcast." Yeah, you could, but it's gonna suck. They are not going to do a good job. They are not professional audio engineers, not professional audio editors, dialogue editors. So if you are going to hire a producer or an editor, make sure that you are hiring the right person for your content, and that the pay is going to reflect that as well. So tip number 2 is the exact opposite of that spectrum, which is you don't edit anything. That's the easiest solution to cut down on your post-production and editing time, is you just don't edit anything. So the pros for that is you save a ton of time, but the cons are that you need to be incredibly conscious while you're recording. It means that when your guest sits down across from you, you let them know, you say, "Hey, once that red light is going and we're recording, it's going out to the world." So I find finding a balance between those two extremes is probably healthier for the hobbyist podcaster or the average podcaster, which you probably are. So we'll go into tip number 3, which is for you Logic or GarageBand users, and that is utilizing the Verispeed function. So I'm only talking about Logic and GarageBand because that's what I do for all of the podcasts that I make, and we will switch over to Logic to show you how it goes. All right, so we've got Logic pulled up here, and you can see in the top of the bar or the top of your screen, you'll see speed only. So to get to that, you'll open this drop-down menu and select custom. And then if it's not there, you'll click customize control bar and display. You'll select custom here, and you want this Verispeed on. So when the Verispeed is on, that means that we can actually speed up the playback for this. So as you can see here, it's playing back at a normal speed. However, you can put this up all the way to 100%, which means you're listening at twice the speed. So you can't really see it here, but it's playing back at twice the speed. There you go. You can play it back at twice the speed, and that is a really quick way to cut down on your post-production time. So the pros for using the Verispeed function in GarageBand or Logic Pro X is it cuts the time spent listening back through to your audio up to basically in half. However, the cons for that is it takes a while to actually train your ear to pick up on everything at that speed. I really only use the Verispeed function when I'm editing something that doesn't require anything removed from a content perspective. I'm just looking for crutch words like like, things that are excessive from whoever's speaking that needs to be removed, that's not necessary to the final product that's going out. So it basically just takes practice. You just do it over and over again. You get better at it. I would recommend starting at like 25% speed until you get comfortable with that, then bump up to 50, then bump up to 75, then bump up to 100%, and you can fly through an audio file pretty quickly. Number 4 is using Descript. So Descript is a free tool that you can use. However, some of the better features that you want to use, especially for dialogue editing, you'll want to upgrade to the pro features, but we'll talk about that in a second. So the great thing about Descript is that it can remove filler words, and you can actually read through your audio and edit that, because it'll do a pretty rough transcription. It's not perfect by any means, but it'll give you a pretty good sense of the content that you're looking at. And if you are more of a visual editor instead of an auditory editor, that will be helpful as well in terms of cutting down on that time you spend in post-production. So I will pull up Descript now, and I will show you exactly what that looks like. Okay, so we are in Descript, and as you can see, I've got this episode, but the audio version pulled up. You can see the rough transcription pulled out, and the way that I will pull out all of those ums and uhs. So I'm going to go over here and select remove filler words. There we go. It's highlighted ums, uhs, ums. I obviously left a bunch in there for the sake of this video. However, you can see here that says 53 more filler words found. And if you want things like like, and repeated words, and a dozen other disfluencies, is that even a word? You have to upgrade to the Pro. So we're not going to do that, but we're going to hit apply to all. Boom, it's deleted 35 sections. So we'll scroll down and see if we can find one. There's one right here, this gray arrow that's put down. So that one was removed, and it was removed from the audio as well. So the pros for using Descript are you cut out all the ums and the uhs, and it's really quick to actually have them removed for you. And then you can just read through the podcast audio and see if there was anything that was missed, and you can remove those as well, rather than listening through the whole audio file from start to finish. The cons to this is that the AI software that it uses to transcribe needs a little bit of work. It's not perfect by any means. And I personally am not super confident that it catches all of the ums and uhs. And when it does, I'm not comfortable with how it fills those gaps with dead air. I would like to have a fade out from the final word that's spoken before the and then a fade back in into the next word. That way, it's not a really hard chop, and where the listener can really notice that that was removed. I find that if you can blend those out and hide them as much as possible, it makes the listening experience so much better for the listener. So that's why I personally like to go through and remove them myself. I don't necessarily use Descript, but for someone that's in a hurry, I think that it's a great tool to use to actually cut down on the post-production time that you spend editing. So those 4 tips are really for removing filler content, things like ums, uhs, as I've mentioned that a bunch of times now. Now, in terms of actually being podcast specific, I've got a few more tips to help you out there. So tip number 5 is have your stock intro and outro recorded and ready to go and saved onto your computer so that you can just drop it right into your audio file. So what this means is, if for my podcast, for example, every episode had an intro where it was 35 seconds and I was always introducing myself, what this podcast was about, where people can find me on social media, and to subscribe to the podcast, my call to action. It takes a lot of time over the course of doing 150 episodes, the amount of time that you would spend recording that intro every single time, and then adding all of your plugins, mixing that audio, editing it if you mess up. Every single time you do your episode, that time really adds up. So if you can do it once, have it recorded really cleanly and edited and bounced, then you're golden. You will save so much time. Just all you have to do is just drop it right in before your dialogue, and you're set to go for the intro. Same with your outros. Tip number 6 is combining your stock intro with leveled music. That's basically just taking step 5 a step further, hence step 6. So if you have music in your podcast, let's just, for a very basic example, would be your music comes in, it fades down a little bit so your intro can play, and then it fades back up, and then it fades out, and then your content starts. Having all of that ready to go, and so it's the same every single time, so you don't have to go in and manually level out the music so it's low enough for the listener to hear your intro, and then level it back up so they have that sort of high peak, and then it fades out right into your content. Having all of that ready to go to where you can just drag and drop and not have to ever mess with it again, that will also save you a ton of time in post-production. Tip number 7 is keeping your recording environment the same for every single episode, so that if you get into more detail with your post-production, meaning your equalization, your compression, other plugins that you might use to help clean up your voice. If your recording environment is the same, the plugins that are required to make your voice sound as clean as possible are going to be relatively the same as well. If you are constantly changing up your recording environment, some days you're recording in the kitchen, some days you're recording in your closet, some days you're recording in a podcast studio, that's going to require a lot more time and attention on your end in order to make sure your voice sounds really clear, really clean, and level for the listener. So if you can keep your recording environment the same, you can actually save a list and order of your plugins so that you don't even have to mess with them anymore. They're all just ready to go. You just load them up as a template, drop them over your voice, you're set to go, and you can start actually editing the dialogue. So those are some hacks that you can use to cut down on the time you spend in post-production for your podcast. Now we'll talk about what to do during an interview to actually limit the time that you spend in post-production. So these are things that you can do in real time when you're interviewing a guest, doing your own podcast by yourself, or conducting, a multi-person interview to hopefully cut down on the dialogue editing that's required. So tip number one would be just to speak slowly and take your time between answers. Oftentimes when you hear crutch words like, trying to collect your thoughts together, just speak slowly and collect your thoughts, because oftentimes our mouths move a lot faster than our brains, and that's where those crutch words come out. And they can be jarring, they can be distracting to the listener, and they can make you sound like you don't exactly know what you're talking about. So if you speak slowly and you really take your time and are thoughtful with what you're about to say next, you sound much more professional. You cut down immensely. I would say probably 75 to 90% of the crutch words are going to be cut down just by doing this tip alone. Just speaking slowly and taking your time and collecting your thoughts. It might feel weird and sound weird in the moment, but trust me, in the post-production process, when you're listening back to it, you're going to sound a lot smarter. Tip number 2, don't talk over your guest or the interviewer if you're a guest on a podcast. One thing you really want to avoid during this is if you have a thought and you immediately start talking while the other person is talking and you go, oh, wait, sorry, no, you go ahead. No, finish your thought. No, you go ahead. That's totally unnecessary to the final product of a podcast, and it's going to need to be edited out. So if you just relax, take your time, listen to what the other person is saying, wait for them to finish their thought completely, and then contribute your piece to the conversation. It's going to sound cleaner, it's going to sound more professional, and it's not going to be something that you have to edit and tweak and play around and cut and drag and try and splice together in post-production. Tip number 3, don't touch your mic. Don't be adjusting the boom if at all possible during the podcast. I like to treat this thing as an immovable object. The way that it's set up before I start recording, I'm not touching it. I'm not moving it. My body needs to conform to where the microphone is. You want to keep it about a fist away from your face. That way you're not moving it, touching it, tapping it, playing with the boom arm. That's stuff that you would want to have to edit out in post, especially if you're doing a multi-track podcast. The other person is talking, you start playing around with your microphone, it starts making all this shuffling noises. That stuff needs to be cut out in post-production. That's more time spent in the editing room than you need to be. So just be conscious of that. Think about it. Place your microphone where you know you're not going to want to have to move it, or just adjust your body to conform with the microphone. Number 4, coughing, sneezing, drinking, swallowing. Try and do that away from the microphone. So this is gonna sound gross. That would have to be cut out in posts. But if the other person is talking, there's no camera, you guys are just doing an audio podcast, they're talking, you want to take a drink, there you go. Same thing with coughing, sneezing, sniffling, anything like that. Just be conscious that the microphone is picking up everything that you're doing. And those mouth sounds, things like that, those can be they're just gross and they're distracting to a listener. So things to think about, that would have to be cut out in post. Number 5, setting up your mics a proper distance away from each other to avoid microphone bleed. So I'll do an example. If I'm having a conversation with another person, they're sitting right next to me and our microphones are this far apart. When I'm not speaking, everything that's being spoken into this microphone is also being picked up right here. And that can really screw up your audio, especially if you're doing multi-track recording. Now, that's something that you're going to have to go through and post and really isolate this vocal right here, just this audio track. You want to isolate that and post. But if they're a proper distance away, there's a lot smarter people than me out there that know the proper distancing on how to set these microphones up to avoid bleed. But I just like to use the COVID rules, 3 to 6 feet apart if it's possible. I know with every recording environment, it's different. It may not be possible, but try to keep that in mind. Not having to cut that kind of stuff out in post is going to be really helpful as well. Number 6, if you're taking notes, you probably have your questions that you want to ask listed out on either a laptop or a piece of paper right in front of you. During the recording of a podcast, say you ask your question, the person is answering, there's a dog barking in the background, you sneeze, you cough, something happens, or they stutter, they take 2 or 3 seconds to collect their thoughts and they throw an in there. Just take your pen, mark it down, write a little X next to your question. That way, okay, in this part of the podcast, I need to go back in and post, and there's going to need to be an edit there. So that way you're not listening through from start to finish. You can jump around and go, oh, okay, this is the question where I asked about where they went to college. And I know that something needed to be edited there because I made a little blue X there. So that's another tip to help in real time cut down on what needs to be edited out in post. There you have it. Those are all of my tips. I'm sure there are more. If you have other tips that you use to cut down on post-production, I know that there are tons of other DAWs out there, digital audio workspaces like Reaper, Audition, Pro Tools, Audacity. All of those other ones have their own tips and tricks in terms of helping hack the post-production side of podcast editing. So I would love to hear your thoughts. You can tweet them at me at Johnny Threederson, or comment on this video. So I hope this was helpful. This was everything that came to my mind. I'm sure I missed some, so forgive me if I did. I appreciate you tuning into this video. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and subscribe if this is the type of content you're looking for. I will see you the next time I make a video, which is who knows when.